Ever get the urge to really sink your teeth into a crime novel? Something that's less about a quick, thrilling escape and more about a deep dive into a dark and complex world. A book that maybe even, grapples with some of the big questions that you usually find in classic literature.
You're talking about a certain kind of crime novel, for sure.
Yeah, one that doesn't pull any punches. And if you're looking for that kind of experience, well, you might be wondering about Don Winslow's The Cartel.
I can see why. It's gotten a lot of attention, and it's definitely not your average beach read.
Exactly. So today we're going beyond just like a basic summary. We're going deep, exploring what makes the cartel tick. What are the forces behind it? Why did it generate so much buzz? And ultimately, is it the right book for you?
Sounds like a plan. A literary deep dive it is.
Precisely. And to keep us on track, we've got three key sources guiding our exploration today.
Let's hear them.
All right, we've got the Wikipedia pages for both Don Winslow himself and for the cartel, and we've got a particularly insightful review from Kirkus Reviews.
Good mix.
Yeah, I think so. So our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to equip you, the listener, with all the essential knowledge you need to decide if you want to take on this, pretty substantial novel. But, and here's the catch, we're doing it all without venturing into spoiler territory.
Challenge accepted. Where do we begin?
Well, before we crack open the cartel, I think it makes sense to get a feel for the author himself. So who exactly is Don Winslow, the mastermind behind this world?
All right, well, the basics. Don Winslow is an American author born in 1953. He's made a real name for himself in the world of crime fiction. You've probably heard of some of his other books, like Savages or The Force. They've definitely made an impact.
Right, I've seen those around.
Yeah. And as you mentioned earlier, The Cartel is actually part of a trilogy. It's the middle book, the second in his Cartel trilogy, which just adds another layer of intrigue to this whole thing, right?
For sure. It seems like he likes to write on a grand scale.
He does. But here's something that really caught my eye. Back in 2022, Winslow actually announced that he was retiring from writing.
Retiring?
Yeah, to focus on political activism. It's quite a shift, right? Going from crafting these fictional worlds to directly engaging with the real methy world of politics.
That's a major life change, especially after such a successful writing career. Makes you wonder what kind of experiences and influences shaped his storytelling, right?
For sure. It seems like his background is anything but ordinary. I mean, born on Staten Island, but then he spent his childhood in a Rhode Island beach town. Imagine the contrast. And he actually points to his parents as big influences.
Interesting. In what way?
Well, his mother was a librarian, so you can imagine he was surrounded by books and stories from a young age. And then you've got his dad, a Navy officer, who was apparently a real natural storyteller himself. He'd often share these captivating tales, with his Navy buddies. That must have had an impact.
Absolutely. A librarian mother and a storytelling Navy father. Sounds like a recipe for a future writer. But did he always know he wanted to write novels?
Not necessarily. Academically, he focused on history, got a degree in African history, and then went on to get a master's in military history. So quite a diverse range of knowledge there.
Wow. African history and military strategy. It's almost like you can see those threads woven into his crime novels, the way he builds these complex, conflict-driven worlds.
You can totally see the connections. But here's the thing. He didn't go straight from getting those degrees to writing novels. His early career is actually fascinating.
Okay, lay it on me. What did he do?
All right, so in the 1980s, he was working as an analyst for the Department of State in South Africa. During apartheid, no less.
Wow.
Right. Then he shifts gears completely and becomes a safari guide in Kenya. Talk about a change of scenery. Imagine the stories he must have picked up there, out in the wild.
Seriously. That's incredible.
But it doesn't stop there. He comes back to the U.S., and in the late 80s, he works as a private investigator. So you've got this blend of international intrigue, close encounters with nature, and then the gritty reality of private investigation.
Safari Guide turned private eye. That's not your typical author bio. It sounds like he had a lot of real-world experiences to draw from when he finally did turn to writing.
Absolutely. Talk about a wealth of inspiration.
So when did he actually make that leap into fiction writing?
Well, he started writing his very first novel, A Cool Breeze, on the Underground, while he was traveling, all over the place. Asia, Africa, Europe, America. Talk about writing on location.
Wow, that's dedication.
Right. And that debut novel wasn't just a side project. It was nominated for both the Edgar Award and the Shamus Award.
Oh.
And those are big deals in the crime fiction world. So he kind of burst onto the scene with a splash.
Impressive. What happened after that?
He continued with his Neil Carey series, building a solid reputation. But the real turning point, the moment he became a full-time writer, was when he got a film and publishing deal for his standalone novel, The Death and Life of Bobby Z. That was a major breakthrough.
A movie deal, that's the dream. So after that, he was able to really focus on writing.
Exactly. He settled in California, and that became the setting for many of his later books. He even co-created a TV series called Yukon Cover. So he was really making a name for himself across different mediums.
So by the time he started the Cartel trilogy, he was already a well-established author.
Absolutely. And that trilogy is, well, it's a massive undertaking.
It is. So when did this epic series begin?
The first book, The Power of the Dog, came out in 2005. It introduces DEA agent Art Keller and his relentless pursuit of this powerful cartel. It was a huge success.
Okay. And then 10 years later?
10 years later, boom, Cartel hits the shelves in 2015. And then finally, the trilogy concludes with The Border in 2019. So you can see, Winslow took his time with these books, a decade between the first and second installments, which really speaks to the depth and complexity of the story he was crafting.
It's clearly not a trilogy he rushed. So let's focus on the Cartel, that middle book. What's at the heart of the story, and what kind of, heavy themes does it tackle?
All right, so The Cartel picks up where The Power of the Dog left off. Kirkus Reviews describes it as this blend of two things. On the one hand, you've got that raw, visceral excitement of Pulp Fiction, the kind of stuff that keeps you on the edge of your seat. But on the other hand, Winslow brings a level of seriousness, almost like a literary weight, to the story.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the main plot?
At its core, it's about the escape of a major Mexican drug lord, Adon Barrera, from prison. And this forces DEA agent Art Keller, who had basically retreated from that world, back into the fray.
Ah, so it's that classic setup where someone tries to leave a dangerous life behind, but then they get pulled back in.
Exactly. And just to give you a sense of the scope of this book, we're talking almost 600 pages. 600. And the overall tone is, as Kirkus puts it, grave, very serious. But there's another element that really highlights this seriousness, and that's Winslow's use of epigraphs.
Epigraphs? You mean those quotes at the beginning of chapters?
Right. And these aren't just random quotes. Winslow's pulling lines from heavy hitters like Hemingway, Shakespeare, even the Bible. I mean, that tells you something about his intentions. It's like he's trying to elevate the genre, place his crime story within this larger literary tradition.
Shakespeare and drug cartels. That's quite a combination. So, beyond the plot, what are some of the big ideas Winslow's grappling with in the Cartel?
Well, Kirkus points to this one theme that really resonated with them, and I think it's central to the book, the idea of symbiosis between the hunter and the hunted.
Okay, unpack that for me. What does that mean in this context?
It's this idea that the pursuer and the pursued, they become intertwined, almost dependent on each other. They define each other in a way. It's a pretty unsettling thought, but it makes sense when you think about the nature of these long-running conflicts.
Right. It's like they're locked in this endless dance. So that central theme plays out against the backdrop of the war on drugs, right?
Exactly. And Kirkus describes the book as having a noir edge. That style that's all about cynicism, moral ambiguity, and this pervasive sense of, darkness.
Yeah, noir definitely has a distinct feel. So the setup is classic, the themes are heavy, the tone is dark. It sounds pretty intense. How did critics respond to all of this?
Well, it's interesting. The Kirkus Review actually provides a pretty nuanced perspective.
Yeah.
They noticed a shift in Winslow's writing style compared to his earlier work.
In what way?
They say that his earlier crime novels, especially those set in the surfing world, had a certain casual ease, a more relaxed flow. But in the Cartel, they felt like each word seems to have been written in granite.
Written in granite? That's a powerful image. It definitely suggests a more deliberate, weighty style.
Right. And it seems like Kirkus had some mixed feelings about this shift. They felt that this seriousness sometimes led to cliches, particularly in the way some characters were portrayed. Like they gave the example of a character being described as born on Christmas Day to campesinos in a pan, or another character who's the son of an Anglo father who didn't want a half-Mexican kid.
Ah, so they felt like those descriptions were a bit too familiar, a bit lacking in nuance.
Exactly. Like Winslow was relying on those kind of stock characters that we see before.
Right. So they're acknowledging his ambition, but also pointing out that it doesn't always succeed in their view. What was their overall verdict?
Ultimately, Kirkus felt that this attempt to blend pulp fiction with literary ambition ended up making the genre formulas feel leaden. Like the book didn't quite reach its full potential.
So a somewhat critical take from Kirkus, but the Wikipedia entry actually highlights the fact that the book was a huge commercial success. How do we reconcile those two things?
That's the fascinating part, right? Despite Kirkus's reservations, the Cartel became an international bestseller, and it was praised by a lot of other critics. I mean, Wikipedia mentions that it got starred reviews from major publications like Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and Library Journal, and it was on over 60 Best Books of the Year lists.
60. Wow. Okay, so clearly a lot of people disagreed with that Kirkus review.
Yeah, it seems like it. And it wasn't just critics who loved it. Wikipedia also mentions that some really big names in the crime fiction world, authors like Stephen King, Michael Connelly, James Ellroy, Harlan Coben, they all raved about the Cartel. They considered it to be one of Winslow's best.
High praise from a pretty tough crowd.
It is. And then, on top of all that, the Cartel won some serious awards.
Like what?
All right, so it won the Ian Fleming Steel Dagger Award, which is a pretty prestigious award for thriller and spy fiction.
Okay, so it was definitely recognized within the genre.
Big time. It also won the RBA Prize for Crime Writing in Spain, which was at the time the world's most lucrative crime fiction prize.
Yeah.
We're talking a significant amount of money.
Wow. And to top it off?
And to top it off, it won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize.
Yeah.
So the Cartel cleaned up in the awards department.
So we've got this interesting situation where we have a somewhat critical, measured take from Kirkus, but then we've got all this positive buzz from other critics, fellow authors, and these major awards. What can we infer about how readers themselves responded to the book?
It's tricky because we don't have access to, a ton of individual reader reviews in our sources.
Yeah.
But we can make some educated guesses.
Right.
I mean, given the critical acclaim and the awards, it's pretty safe to say that a lot of readers were drawn to the book's epic scope and the fact that it doesn't shy away from the brutal realities of the drug war. They probably appreciated Winslow's ambition, his willingness to tackle such a complex and difficult subject.
Yeah, it's not a book for the faint of heart.
Right.
But as Kirkus pointed out, it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, right?
Definitely not. Some readers might have found that the serious tone, and maybe those occasional cliches that Kirkus mentioned, were a bit of a turnoff. Ultimately, it comes down to personal preference. But the book's success suggests that it really resonated with a large audience.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into some of the literary aspects that Kirkus discussed. They mentioned that the book has this, literary ambition. What do they mean by that?
Well, they pointed to Winslow's use of epigraphs as one of the key indicators. Remember, those quotes from Hemingway, Shakespeare, the Bible. That's not something you see in a typical crime novel. So it suggests that Winslow was trying to do something more than just tell a thrilling story. He was trying to elevate the genre, to make it more than just entertainment.
Right, to give it some intellectual weight. And then there's that phrase they used, noir edge. What does that imply about the book's style and themes?
Noir is all about atmosphere. It's about cynicism, moral ambiguity, a sense of doom. Noir stories tend to focus on flawed characters who are trapped in these dark, often violent world. So the noir edge in the Cartel suggests that Winslow's not shying away from the dark side of the drug war. He's exploring the corrupting influence of power, the destructive nature of obsession.
And what about that idea of symbiosis between pursuer and pursued? How does that play into the book's literary depth?
That's one of the most fascinating aspects, I think. It's a classic literary trope, the idea that adversaries are actually deeply connected, that they need each other in a way. And in the Cartel, it suggests that the relationship between Art Keller and Adon Barrera, the DEA agent, and the drug lord, it goes beyond just good versus evil. There's this complex, almost twisted connection between them.
So it's less black and white, more shades of gray. And Kirkus pointed out this tension between, the elements of pulp fiction and the desire for literary seriousness. How does that play out in the book?
That's a good question. I mean, on the one hand, you've got those classic pulp elements, the fast-paced plot, the high stakes, the action. But then you've also got those literary elements, the more complex themes, the heavier writing style.
Yeah.
And sometimes those two things can clash.
Right. It's a delicate balance. So for someone who's listening and thinking about reading The Cartel, who would you say this book is really for?
All right. So if you're the kind of reader who loves those sprawling, ambitious crime sagas, and you're not afraid of a book that's going to, really immerse you in a dark world, then The Cartel is definitely worth checking out. If you're fascinated by stories that explore the complexities of the drug war and the characters who are caught up in it, then this book will probably grab you. And if you appreciate those morally ambiguous characters, the ones who aren't always easy to categorize as good or bad, then you'll find a lot to think about in The Cartel.
And on the flip side, who might want to steer clear?
If you prefer your crime fiction to be a bit lighter, a bit more escapist, then this might not be the book for you. And if you're looking for a story with clear-cut heroes and villains, you're going to be disappointed. The Cartel is all about those gray areas. And if you're the kind of reader who really values nuanced character development and originality, well, you might find some of the elements that Kirk has pointed out, those cliches, to be a bit distracting.
But overall, it sounds like a pretty significant book, especially considering the praise it's received from other authors and the awards it's won.
Absolutely. It's definitely a book that's made a mark on the crime fiction world.
So, to sum it up, The Cartel is a dark, complex, and ambitious exploration of the drug war. It's a book that's been praised for its scope and its intensity, but it's also been criticized for its stylistic choices. Ultimately, it's up to each individual reader to decide whether it's the right book for them.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into The Cartel. We've covered a lot of ground, from Don Winslow's fascinating background to the book's critical reception and the key themes it explores.
We've examined the sources, we've weighed the different perspectives, and hopefully we've given you, the listener, a good sense of what to expect from this book.
Exactly. We always aim to provide you with the information you need to make informed decisions about your reading choices.
Because ultimately that's what it's all about, right? Finding the books that speak to you, that challenge you, that stay with you long after you've finished reading them.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, and you're now eager to explore Don Winslow's work further. Maybe you'll even tackle the entire Cartel trilogy.
That's a challenge for the dedicated reader for sure.
But before you do that, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What aspects of this deep dive resonated most with you? What questions do you still have about The Cartel or about Don Winslow's other books?
Let us know. We're always interested in hearing what you think.
And on that note, we'll wrap things up for today.
Until next time.
Join us next time for another deep dive into a new and exciting topic.